David Seymour has escaped punishment from Parliament's Speaker over his Land Rover stunt, though could still face criminal charges. He was unrepentant about attempting to drive up the steps of Parliament, refusing to apologise to the security guard who had to intervene. And as senior political correspondent Jenna Lynch reports, he's also escaped punishment from the Prime Minister, who he has been accused of publicly undermining.
Strolling up to work totally unapologetic.
Why were you undermining the Prime Minister on radio?
Well, that's your opinion. I don't think I was.
Unrepentant after launching a broadside at the Prime Minister.
I said that I thought some comments were ill-advised if they didn't know all of the facts.
Who made the comments?
Well, Chris Luxon made the comments.
The ex-leader is under fire for advocating for remuera eye surgeon Philip Polkinghorne. In 2022, Seymour sent a letter to police questioning their treatment of Polkinghorne, who they later charged with his wife's murder. He was acquitted at trial. Christopher Luxon called the letter ill-advised. Seymour threw that back at him.
The question is whether the facts you don't know would have changed your outcome.
So you would have still written that letter knowing what you know now about Philip Polkinghorne?
No, because at that time I didn't know that he was going to be prosecuted.
Remorseless despite a meeting last night.
We had a scheduled meeting. It was a very constructive meeting.
What was the tenor of that meeting? Was it terse?
No, it's very positive.
Neither willing to admit the issue was discussed.
I'm not talking about private conversations, but we had a good chat.
Did he tell you to rein it in?
No.
We had a very constructive and positive meeting last night.
Did you tell him to pull his head in?
We had a very good meeting last night and a good chat.
What did he say to you about both the stunt on the steps and the Polkinghorne letter?
Well, once again, we're not going to go through every detail of every conversation.
Christopher Luxon plainly tired of talking about David Seymour.
Again, what I'd say to you is I'm focused on other things. I do not give David Seymour a lot of time thinking about David Seymour.
The opposition driving the division home.
Not since the 1980s has New Zealand had a government that is so at war with itself. So seeing David Seymour and Christopher Luxon taking potshots at each other in public is reminiscent of Richard Prebble and David Lange. David Lange, of course, had the strength to fire Richard Prebble. So far, Christopher Luxon has been too weak to do anything about it.
I'm really worried that David is becoming increasingly unsafe to the community and unsafe to himself. And I'm not quite sure that he's getting the support to be able to maintain safety.
Any criticism of the Prime Minister from their own ministers is undermining the Prime Minister.
Chris Hipkins asking the Prime Minister if he still had confidence in all his ministers.
Given recent revelations that David Seymour intervened in a police murder investigation, referred a sexual abuse survivor to an ACT Party lawyer rather than to the police, and just yesterday potentially illegally attempted to drive a Land Rover up the front steps of Parliament? Yes.
Seymour driving not just the PM but the boss of Parliament up the wall too.
I've expressed to Mr Seymour my strong displeasure at his actions.
Speaker Jerry Brownlee commending the security officer who intervened when Seymour attempted to drive up the steps of Parliament.
The Speaker has said no.
I doubt he would have ever expected to have to tell a member of the House not to drive a vehicle onto the steps of the building.
But the ACT leader is refusing to apologise to the guard who he yesterday chastised for putting himself in harm's way.
There were ways that he could have described or could have intervened that were less dangerous.
There was a slight sorry of sorts.
Mr Seymour has sent me a letter about the matter in which he says, quote, "Please accept my apologies for any offence this may have caused."
But there was no rule the Speaker could grasp at to punish Seymour, so now it's over to police to determine whether to charge him.
Jenna is with us now. Kia ora, Jenna. So what can the Prime Minister do about David Seymour?
Well, he can express his opinion, but judging by David Seymour's reaction to it, he doesn't give two hoots about that. Normally, the rules of this place are the Prime Minister says something and the ministers say, yes, I agree with the Prime Minister. But David Seymour clearly sees himself as under a different set of rules than other ministers because he is a party leader in the coalition, therefore has the ability to break apart the coalition. Punishing him using a demotion or the like would be seen as a nuclear option for Christopher Luxon rather than a tool that he has in the toolkit for other ministers in the National Party. Seymour partly climbed down on the Polkinghorne issue today, both acknowledging that he wouldn't send that letter knowing what he knows now, and perhaps in future he might look to send something to the IPCA, the Independent Police Conduct Authority, rather than the police. But because of the way that Seymour operates, that automatic fight mode that he goes into, he'd already stirred it into a public scrap with the Prime Minister before making those concessions. It doesn't feel as though the coalition is at breaking point, more talking to people that this was a letting off of some steam that happens routinely before the cooling off period today. But the question remains how long this heat can be turned up before the Prime Minister boils over and puts David Seymour in his place.
OK, Jenna, thanks so much.